even if you're not mindful of the Greek myths, we have a certain like cultural understanding of them.
Yeah.
She finds a way to make that understanding feel completely like reconfigured. And she loves to like look down at her desk and see like, okay, I'm looking down at a play by this writer and a painting by that painter. What if I make myself write a piece where those two things need to find a way to interact with each other?
Welcome to Shoulda Books, the podcast about all the books you should have read by now. My name is Jonathan, and today I am joined by author Scott Broker. Scott is a writer, bookseller, and teacher based in the beautiful city of Los Angeles. His writing has appeared in many places, including New England Review, Fence, and the Idaho Review, plus many, many more. His debut novel, The Disappointment, is available in stores right now. It's published by Catapult, and it is not a disappointment. It is a delight. It's sad. It's funny, it's heartbreaking, it's horny. We get into all this in the episode. I could listen to Scott talk about books for hours. He brought some great books. He brought some great takes on those books. And I think you're going to enjoy this. But first, the next episode of Shoulda Films. That's the bonus show where I talk about a movie that has been adapted from a book. It comes out this Tuesday, March 17th. And it's about, that's right, the 2011 adaptation of Jane Eyre starring Mia Wasikowska and Michael Fassbender. I brought back friend of the show, friend of me, Jack McGill, to discuss this movie that I quite enjoyed. It was a very good adaptation, in my opinion, but we'll get into that. So if you want to see that conversation, if you want ad-free extended versions of these episodes, if you want more, if you want access to the Discord, if you want access to my short fiction, head over to the Shoulda Books Patreon, patreon.com/Shoulda Books. Now, the Shoulda Book Club book for this month is The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. This book is fantastic so far. I'm really looking forward to discussing it. If you want to follow along with the discussion, head on over to Fable. You can find the Shoulda Book Club there. The link is down below. If you want to pick up a copy of The Outsiders, if you want to pick up a copy of any of the books we discussed today, perhaps The Disappointment by Scott Broker, I highly recommend it. There are links in the description to bookshop.org. Bookshop.org lets you buy books from independent bookstores. And if you use the links in the description, you help me out a little bit. I get a little bit of a commission for these affiliate links. Everybody wins. I get something, the author gets something, you get a book. Hallelujah. Okay, without any further ado, let's get to my conversation with Scott, and let's hit the books. Scott Broker.
Hello.
Welcome to Shoulda Books.
Thank you for having me.
How are you doing today?
I'm good. I meant to tell you this when I got here, but I had a bad dream about doing this podcast last night. Yeah, we were sitting here, and for some reason, I couldn't open my eyes. A stress dream, if you will.
Okay.
So I was just sitting here talking through all of my books, willing myself to like yank my eyes open, but now we're sitting here and my eyes are open.
And now we're sitting here, your eyes are open.
Yes.
And I am so sorry to have caused a stress dream.
No, it's okay.
Yeah.
I think it got me in the right headset.
Okay, got you in the right headspace.
Yeah.
If it makes you feel any better, I have stress dreams about this podcast too.
Not alone.
We are, yes. But you have a book of your own that is out right now. It's called The Disappointment. And for video I was going to say video listeners, video watchers, here it is right here. It's got a beautiful cover. I read this book. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
I thought it was funny. It was touching. It was poignant. It was horny as hell.
Yeah.
And I really just found myself like really latching onto these characters, especially the narrator. It's about a couple going on a vacation to the beautiful Oregon coast, but that trip is kind of shrouded by grief. Can you tell me a little bit about the book, and then we'll get into the rest of the books?
Yes, totally. Yeah. I know it's so funny to start by describing a book as horny and then 2 seconds later saying that it's shrouded in grief.
Yes.
Because they seem opposed, but I don't think they are. But yeah, I came to this idea of wanting to write about kind of conflicting griefs. And one of the characters has recently lost his mother, Randy, who is a photographer, and his husband, Jack, has recently lost his career as a playwright, which he's chosen to leave behind after fighting for it for the better part of 2 decades. And I thought it was interesting to pair these two because I think that we subconsciously rank grief almost. And we think the death of a loved one, of course, is a more significant loss than the death of a career or the death of a passion. And I think that is true to a certain extent, but I still think that when you're the one who has lost your career or your passion, it's felt very intensely. And I don't know if we have the right language for that type of grief yet, but I knew that it was going to be hard for a character who is struggling through processing that experience to feel like he's constantly having to undermine his own sadness because he's confronted day after day with his husband who has lost his mother,
right?
Which again feels more legitimate. So yeah, the book basically starts with them already in this perilous state, and they go to Oregon, and things get increasingly strange for them, and the strangeness hopefully puts. My hope is it puts different pressures on that kind of already fragile existence that they're living in.
And speaking of pressures, I'm going to put some pressure on myself because I got you a book.
Oh my gosh.
And you can open it at the end of the episode.
Okay.
And we're going to find out whether I made a good choice or not. And I got to say, I was really stressed about choosing this because I saw on your Instagram that last year you read, was it 161 books?
I think it was maybe 164. Not to fact check you, but yeah, I think. It was okay. I could be wrong. Maybe 163.
It was. In other words, it was a lot, a grotesque amount.
Yes.
Yeah. So you read. I think the proper term is a shit ton.
Yeah.
And
Indeed, yes.
And so I was like, I have no idea what to get that he hasn't already read. So we're gonna find out. But is that the normal number of books that you read in a year, or was 2025 kind of an outlier for you?
So that, I think I've averaged out around there for the last few years. There was one year, and I say this not with pride, but with shame, and this was a COVID year. This was 2020.
Oh, okay. All bets are off.
And I was living in Ohio, so a bleak state of the United States, a bleak state of mind. And I read like 221 books.
Oh my goodness.
I know.
I am famously bad at math. How many is that per month? It's a lot.
It's too many. It's too many. And I really don't. I know some people hear that and are impressed, and I am like, it's a sickness. I need to find some other hobbies because I just give too much time to the books. Luckily now things have measured out a little bit. I give more time to my loved ones. I go on more walks. Okay. So I would say around 160 is where things land these days.
What is your reading routine like to be putting up numbers like that?
One, I do make a lot of time for reading.
Yeah.
When I wake up, I love to read.
Really? Right when you wake up?
Yeah.
Is this before you get out of bed? You just reach for a book and...
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. I love the morning. I love the night. I also love the afternoon. So
yeah, you got to choose one.
Yeah, I got to choose one. Yeah. I make time for it. I also think that I'm good at locking into a book. And that I think is something that is hard. A lot of my friends, my partner, they love reading, but if you're out at a coffee shop, it's hard to kind of like actually focus in.
Yeah.
And I just think I'm able to kind of put on white noise, blockers and just read. So yeah, I have high endurance.
So you brought 3 books that you think everyone should read.
Yep.
And I'm just kind of doing the math here. I mean, you've probably read millions of books at this point.
At least, yeah.
So you've got a very wide swath. How did you narrow it down to 3?
with a lot of fretting.
Stress dreams.
Yeah, I was stress dreaming. I really did think about it for a while because I like a wide array of books, and there's some books that I really do think everyone should read and would probably, if not enjoy the experience, it would be a meaningful experience for them. And then there's a lot of books I read that I do not think everyone should read, and I think that is okay. But I had to whittle it down, and I think I was thinking about the classics, of course, and canonical writers who we already insist that they ought to be read. And so I was wondering, do I still go for one of them? And I did go for one canonical writer.
Okay.
And then two more contemporary writers. And yeah, it was tough though. But I wanted, ultimately, I think each book speaks to a different thing that I appreciate in great literature. And I wanted that range because I didn't want each book to be serving the same readerly, wants and needs. But it was hard. It was hard. And I'm sure on my drive home today, I'm going to think, why didn't I recommend book X and Y and Z? But I will settle with my stack. Yeah.
Look, that is a story of podcasting. As soon as you stop recording, you're like, I should have said this. Should have said this. But you know what? We're not going to be, what is the word I'm looking for? Hamstrung by, second guesses. We're going to get right into it. So what is the first book that you have today?
Yeah. So my first book is Another Country by James Baldwin.
Ooh, okay.
So this is my canonical choice.
The canonical author, yes.
Baldwin obviously is beloved and rightfully so. I think he's a phenomenal writer in all senses. I think his characters are great. I think his sentences are great. I think his fiction is great. His nonfiction is great. He really he can do it all. But I have found that this novel is talked about less than a lot of his other work. Have you read it before?
I'm not familiar with this one. I've read Go Tell It on the Mountain and really enjoyed it. I totally understand what you're saying, but sentence to sentence, he is beautiful and brilliant.
Yes.
And I've been meaning to read more. We've had a previous guest brought on Giovanni's Room, which is also on my list. I know that's kind of that one gets talked about a lot when you're talking about his fiction. But I'm not familiar with this one. What is Another Country about?
Yeah, so this one it starts looking at this jazz musician named Rufus. And this is only a spoiler insofar as if you read the back of the book, you will find this out.
Okay.
But he is wandering through New York City. He is bereft and agitated. And the first section ends with him committing suicide. Oh. And the rest of the novel, which is the majority of the novel, looks at the kind of wake of his death across his entire community. And which James Baldwin, I think, is great at doing this. He writes such dynamic casts of characters who come from so many different walks of life. And by, I think, taking them all seriously and treating them with dignity, you end up getting this amazing tapestry of how differently this one man has impacted the lives of those around him. And the way I talk about this book is that it feels like a way to consider deeply the both, I think, triumph and, challenge of intersectionality, because there's, across this cast, there's differences in race, in class, in sexuality, in gender, and the various power dynamics that inform each of those things manifests oftentimes in negative ways, because how else does a power dynamic manifest? Oftentimes at the societal level, but they're still in community with one another. And you see the friction that can exist between them on account of any of these identities. And you see the way that their loss is informed by all of these identities. But it's such an amazing, I think, testament to his attentiveness as a writer and his attention to nuance and to understanding and not letting anyone be reduced down to hero or villain. I think each character is so thoroughly layered that you can't say any definitive thing about them. And I think that's amazing. It also spans, there's sections in France, there's sections in New York. So it has this kind of multiculturalism threaded throughout as well. And the title obviously has a nice, there's a metaphoric component to what another country is, and then also a literal component. I think that the feeling and the metaphorical sense of estrangement within one's own place of living. And, this came out in 1962. A lot of what he was writing about was very taboo to be writing about. And I think it's another thing that I always point to his work as just like, talk about brave work that is so unabashed in what it wants to discuss. And I think there are lessons for all of us in that. So it's a very, very special book. And also grief saturated, which may be a theme in what I'm here to talk about.
There might be a through line here.
Yes.
Okay. I'm curious where and when you read this book. When did this book come into your life?
I think that I read it during graduate school. So in Ohio, so maybe in like 2018.
Okay.
So by that point I'd read Giovanni's Room. I'd read Going to Meet the Man, which for any short story readers is an amazing collection of stories. So, and then I'd read Go Tell It on the Mountain as well. So I knew those works, and I was a little intimidated by this one. It's not even that long, but it was long enough for me to put off reading it for a while. But then I read it and was amazed that I'd been sleeping on it. So yeah, I do think probably 2018.
Okay.
Deep in the midst of grad school living.
Yeah. Yeah. Were you able to still read as much when you were in grad school, or did you have to put some of the reading aside and focus more on the work?
I read a lot in grad school, and I think partially it was because I was living at the time with one of my best friends, Sheldon, hello, and he and I lived together, best friends in the same program. And one of the both pros and cons of living together was, I think we had this sort of unspoken rivalry around reading.
Oh, interesting.
A heated rivalry, if you may.
Heated rivalry.
A heated rivalry, yes.
Yeah.
And so we would just sit on this couch, and it was like we were half reading our books and half looking to see how quickly the other person was reading.
Giving yourselves paper cuts.
Yes.
Like
oh my gosh.
You're like turning the pages.
Yes. And then he'd be like, "Oh, well, you read more poetry than I do, so naturally your numbers are going to be higher than me." And it was. We both look back and are kind of like, what were we doing? Like we had that going with our reading and our writing.
Yeah.
It made us both so productive, but at what cost?
At what cost?
I do think at a cost, yes.
That is something that I have been like thinking about a lot as I'm doing this project, in terms of like, I think I have so much neuroses around, am I reading enough to be someone who is creating in this space? And it's like, what a toxic way to think about it, of like, and I think that like it's indicative of a bigger trend, which is the reduction of everything in our lives to data,
Yes.
and it's like taking art and turning that into numbers, and I think that, as much as we can, we should try to resist that, Yeah. And I bring you back to this book. So the main character who commits suicide he's a jazz musician.
Yep.
What are some of the things that this book has to say about art?
Wow, that's a great question. I mean, I think if you're someone who's interested in writing about music in particular, Baldwin is also great on that front. And a lot of his characters are jazz musicians or no jazz musicians, and there's, I think, a through line across his books of what I would say, in this case, more specifically, what jazz means to people, but also you could extend from there of what art can mean to people. So yeah, I think that what art means to a lot of his characters, and in this case, what jazz means is an expression of, I think, internal anguish, oftentimes pain. It's a way to externalize those feelings for yourself. There's a great story, if you're looking for just a sampler, on Baldwin called Sonny's Blues, which is about someone whose brother is a jazz musician. And there's this amazing scene where he goes to see him perform. And throughout their relationship, he's kind of been dismissive of his brother's way of living. He sees it as being a little bit like debauched. And, he's spending his nights in the clubs, and he's partying. He's so cool. And his brother is more kind of quote unquote upstanding citizen.
I see.
And he goes to see his brother perform, and it's this completely transformative experience for him because of what he sees his brother putting into the music. And I think that is conveyed really well in this book as well, is that we can turn to someone's art as a way to better understand their interior life. Obviously, it is not one-to-one.
Sure.
Which I say partially for my family watching this who reads what I write and are sometimes like, are you okay?
Yeah.
But I do think, it's such a unique way to see the interior made exterior.
Yeah. And
Baldwin definitely captures that really well, particularly I think in the realm of music.
To bring it back to your work, I think that is one of the questions that the book is asking. And I think at some point, correct me if I'm wrong, someone actually does verbalize this, the question of, can art save you? And like, it was, I remember when I read that, I kind of like paused, because it is something that to see it articulated is like this question of like, okay, you are dedicating your life to this thing. Why? Are you hoping that it's going to, quote, save you in some way? What does that even mean? What does that even look like? And I think that like, it's a question that like every person who makes art needs to grapple with, because I think that like, again, to bring it back to the forces in our world that turn everything into numbers, et cetera, it's like, it's so easy to just be, whether you admit it or not, saying that like the only way that this counts as success is if there's a dollar sign to it, And I think that your book is such a heartbreaking but honest portrait of someone who is like run those numbers and said, you know what, it's not worth it. And that's so sad. It's so sad, but it also brings the question of like, can you stop being an artist? Because it is this expression of your soul. And so, I trying to figure out exactly what question I want to ask with that, but what were kind of some of those conversations you had with yourself on that topic as you wrote this?
Yeah, I mean, so many interesting ideas there. And all of which I was circling while writing this book. One, with can art save you? I think the question could also be asked, can anything save you?
Yeah.
And I do feel, maybe I'm projecting onto humanity, but there's a desire to find meaning for oneself or a sense of safety. And maybe when we talk about what it means to be saved, it means to be looked out for by something beyond yourself. Maybe I'm shooting in the dark here. I could answer differently in a few minutes, but, and I think, whether you're turning to religion, whether you're turning to your friends and family, whether you're turning to art, there's this, I think, existential fear that we are unmoored in our lives, and that there's a natural desire to seek an anchor. And art, I think, can serve the purpose of anchoring you. And I think all anchors can float away, which sounds so scary to say.
Yeah.
But I also think it's maybe just true, and that the work is, oh my God, I sound like a self-help author, the work. But I don't know. I think ultimately we need to figure out, how do you find security within yourself?
Yeah.
And that security might come from these external sources as well. But your eggs cannot all be in that basket. And so with Jack, who has decided to leave his career as a playwright, I knew that there were going to be a lot of readers who saw that decision as an inherently tragic one, because I think you hear about someone leaving behind a passion and you just are like, no, you just keep going.
Right.
But as I wrote the book, I kept having the feeling that it was ultimately, that was the thing that was saving him. That what he thought was stable and what he thought was giving him a sense of self and identity was actually kind of destroying him. And that the decision to leave it behind, and I don't think he yet sees it this way for himself, but I maybe see it this way, was ultimately the most healthy and and honestly, I think kind of valiant decision he could have made. But I think that he's still stuck in the aftermath of being swept up in doubt and regret. And yeah, so I don't know. It's such a hard balance between, sometimes you want to give up on something and you shouldn't.
Yeah.
And sometimes you want to give up on something and maybe you should.
Right.
But I don't think we talk about that enough.
Yeah. Yeah. I certainly reading the book, found myself confronting, feelings that I've felt about my creative endeavors over the years of just like, should I walk away from it? And I think that's what's so scary about seeing a character make that decision, because it's like, oh, if someone else made that decision and they didn't spontaneously combust, does that mean maybe I should do that?
Yeah.
And I think that like everyone has to kind of figure that out for themselves. But I think it's also important to realize that like nothing's forever. Nothing is forever. And it's like, maybe Jack needs a season where he's not doing it. But
yes.
Like as you show in the book, he's made this decision, but throughout the book, he is thinking of this new play.
Yeah.
He can't turn it off.
Yeah.
And so I think that everyone, again, now I'm going to sound like a self-help author. I think everyone is an artist.
Yeah.
And I think that because if we're defining art as like self-expression, everyone has something inside them that they want to express. And I think that like building a healthy relationship with that desire is one of the like grand quests in life, because it is something that if you have an unhealthy relationship with it, it will destroy you. It can and it will,
Yes.
But like that also doesn't mean that you should shut it off because it's part of you, So, yeah. And so it sounds like Another Country is delving into some of those themes as well.
Yeah. And my last thought on this for the moment is that idea of art is hard and that art is suffering, suffering artist trope.
Sure.
I think it makes it really hard for people to discern for themselves, when is this taking me too much? When is this, beating me to a pulp with no end in sight?
Yeah.
Because we're told, oh my gosh, well, yeah, you're a suffering artist. And that's beautiful and that's romantic.
Right.
And I have always had such an issue with that. I will say I'm lucky to not, I think, be the suffering artist type. Despite, I don't know what I might look like. I fit the bill in some ways, but I always find myself thinking that if making art is so unpleasant, why do it?
Right.
Because it's not, the material rewards aren't high.
Especially these days.
Yes, these days. And also the non-material kind of meaningful rewards, even if they're high, if you're losing more than you're gaining, and this maybe is true for everything in your life, like maybe let it go.
Yeah.
If you can.
But
I read, every other interview you read is some writer saying, oh my God, I hate writing so much. And I don't know, it just bums me out, Yeah. It bums me out. But I don't know if they actually think that or if they feel like they need to say that.
Right.
But on record, I will say that I find the process pretty fun. And
wow, there
are hard days, obviously, but I don't know. I wish that for all of us, that we can at least appreciate the
Yeah, it's like
the work.
If this is what you're spending, the lion's share of your free time doing, like it shouldn't be miserable.
No.
But I can certainly relate to that to some extent of just like when you're feeling blocked creatively or something, it can be miserable. But like when you're in a flow state and like the words are just coming, like,
it feels so good.
It's everything.
Yeah, it feels so good.
But any final thoughts on Another Country before we move to your next book?
Only to read it.
To read it?
Yeah, read it. It's a book that you kind of have to take your time with. You settle in. But by settling in, I think you almost just become a part of this community. And you get passed between them and you see all the surprising intersections and you're glad to be there even through the painful stuff.
It's definitely on my list now.
Good.
So what is the next book that you brought in?
So the next one, Autobiography of Red.
Oh,
Do you know this one at all?
I do not know this one.
Okay.
It's by Anne Carson.
Anne Carson, yes. Who I teach writing classes, and last weekend I actually taught a class on Anne Carson. So she's very much on my mind, but I always say that if I could choose the Nobel winner, it would be her. I think when you think of someone's career, the scope of the career, the idiosyncrasies of the career, the surprises of the career, she is, I just think, unparalleled in what she does. So let me tell you a little bit about what she does.
Yeah, because I mean, I know all about her, but if for any of our listeners maybe are not super familiar, I'm not familiar with her. What's she all about?
So she's a classicist. So she translates ancient Greek among other languages, but her main focus is ancient Greek. If anyone has read If Not Winter by Sappho, that translation is done by Anne Carson.
Okay.
She's translated plays by Euripides and Sophocles and all those fellas. And she also does her own work, and her work covers any genre that you could think of. So she writes plays, she writes lectures, she writes short stories, she writes poems. They tend to categorize her just in poetry because I think it's the safest word to use.
Yeah.
But part of what's so exciting about her work in general is the total freedom she has, I think, on the page. She's the kind of person you read and you leave thinking like, oh my God, I can do anything, you know? And that, talk about a good quality to have in a writer, because she just so clearly is delighted to be doing what she's doing. And she doesn't seem to be that mindful of whether you're along for the delight. I think the reader's experience feels almost secondary to her experience.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Which maybe sounds like it wouldn't yield a good book.
Yeah, that's like a dangerous line to toe.
It is, but I think she toes it well because I think her way of seeing is so fresh and surprising that you, the reader, are just like, oh my God, who is this person? So I'll describe this book, which I think captures some of this energy. So this one, the subheader on it is a novel in verse. So it is a novel, but it's written in poems. And it is about the relationship between Heracles, who comes from the Greek myths. You may know him as Hercules. But she calls him Heracles. And there is, in one of the myths, there is this little monster named Giron, who he kills in the myth. And this book, Autobiography of Red, is an autobiography written from the perspective of that little monster, Giron. And it is about a romance that he has with Heracles. So this is something she does really well, is she takes a source material, often one that is very distant from where we are living, and she just pulls it right up to now. And she ingratiates it into the world that we know in a way that doesn't lose the source, but makes it feel like it's been completely refashioned. So this book, despite having, again, one foot in ancient Greece, it also is set in the modern day. They go to, they go to Peru. They go to, I think they go to, what is the state that I'm blanking on right now?
Nebraska.
Not Nebraska. Keep going.
Keep going down the list. Alaska.
No,
Alabama.
New Mexico. They go to New Mexico. Okay. So they're spanning geographies that don't make sense for their actual characters.
Yeah.
They're cast into a completely different story than the story someone might know them in.
Yeah.
But the effect and what I love in her work in general is this collapsing of space and time, where we have, even if you're not mindful of, the Greek myths, we have a certain cultural understanding of them.
Yeah.
And she finds a way to make that understanding feel completely reconfigured. And it's this very fun clash of material. She often talks about how she loves to look down at her desk and see okay, I'm looking down at a play by this writer and a painting by that painter. And what if I make myself write a piece where those two things need to find a way to interact with each other?
Oh, wow. Okay.
So it just creates this very dynamic synergy between parts. And the book is also so beautifully written. It's like you could throw a dart at a page and you will hit a sentence that you're like, I need this tattooed on my arm. You know, like
Let's try it.
Yeah.
Let's try it.
Oh God, now it's going to be bad.
If it is, we'll cut it out.
Okay, I'm opening randomly here. Okay, let's see. As the aeroplane moved over the frozen white flatland of the clouds, Giron left his life behind like a weak season.
That's great.
That's great.
And that's, okay, yeah. So there's airplanes in this.
Yes.
She's clearly just like mishmashing time frames, and like it sounds like what she cares about is probably emotional truth more than any sort of like verisimilitude to reality in a way.
Yep.
I like that.
Yeah. And I think because she's a scholar and spends so much time with these Greek writers, she also writes a lot about the Bronte sisters, and she's a very eclectic reading life, but she seems so enmeshed in that reading life that when she brings in these writers, there's a degree of intimacy between them where it never feels like the standard sort of a formal relationship between like, I will now cite so-and-so.
Right.
It feels like she's talking about this person as if they're a close friend, and that she's almost recalling something that they said or did at their dinner last week. And then you're reminded that they never even lived in the same era.
Right.
And again, that feeling of like that she finds a way to feel close to anything she writes about and to make the reader, therefore, I think, feel very close to it. It's great. It's heartbreaking. It's a romance in the most tragic sense of it.
Okay.
But I cannot recommend it enough. I just think everyone would appreciate it. This is another book I recommend for anyone who is afraid of poetry, because there's some safety in knowing that there's a storyline to follow,
right?
Which is not often the case for poems.
Yeah.
But I think it helps ease you into the experience of reading poems in a way where they remain legible and where you're not going to be like, oh God, the poets are poeting again. I've lost
right. Yeah.
I've lost myself on the page. It's a good entry point for that as well.
And you teach a class on Anne Carson?
I've only done it once now.
Okay. Well, what were you teaching and what was the experience like?
So the experience was wonderful because I got to geek out about her, my favorite thing to do. But I ended up reading through a lot of her books, and I chose a selection of shorter pieces from across her career, partially to show what I mentioned earlier, that like she just does it all. You know, the last piece that we looked at was she calls it a lecture, but it's written from the perspective of the sky. And it's so funny. And the sky talks about having dozens of boyfriends and girlfriends, but those boyfriends and girlfriends are just like cold rocks hurtling through space. At one point, the sky interviews the pebbles of the world, and then interviews Godot from Beckett's Waiting for Godot. So that's what I mean of like, you just read it and you're like, how did you ever think of this?
Wow.
But it's hilarious and it's so creative that, I mean, sometimes you read her, then you look at your own writing and you're just like, oh my God, this is so pale and bland. But I think the call to action when you finish her is just like, oh my gosh, no, let yourself go wild.
That, just hearing about it is inspiring in a way, because it's one of those things where you're realizing, oh, there's no rules.
Yes.
Like you can do whatever. Like, I think that it's so easy to get locked into the idea that whatever medium you're working in is just this thing, whether that's film, fiction, poetry, whatever. Like, and I do think that like we're in a time right now, and I know I keep bringing it back to capitalism basically, but it's like, how can you not? How can you not? But like, there's so much, all of the, or most of the like media that people work in, like have been codified in such a way to make money. And it's like, no, this is what a movie is. Is 3-act structure. It's Save the Cat. It's like, hero's journey. And it's like, those movies can be great, but like the world of film is so much bigger than just like the structure of Star Wars, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like, it's so refreshing to encounter something that just, it breaks the rules because it knows the rules. You know, it sounds like she probably knows the rules better than anyone else.
Yeah.
But like, that's what allows her to make these incredible, like, pastiche isn't, I mean, I haven't read it, so I don't know if that's the right word or not, but like to be able to just like pull from so many different sources and like combine it in a way that I think is incredibly relevant, because like that's what we're doing all day. Like all day we're getting 10,000 different little bits of information, and like somehow in our heads we're making a story out of that.
Yes.
You know? And so like to see that reflected on the page is really exciting.
Yeah, totally. I completely agree. And it is because of capitalism. It's always such a wonderful experience to experience art where you think, oh my gosh, you don't seem to be mindful of the market at all. I think it's really rare to find.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's an issue. I think it makes sense that artists can and sometimes should be mindful of the market, because if you're wanting to make a living, and we all want to make a living, you know, like you do need to sometimes factor those things in.
Yeah.
And also it's sad to think that we need to factor those things in so much. And so when you find someone where you're like, oh my God, you don't seem to give a shit about how this is going to sell or what comp titles they're going to be for this thing. You're just doing, and that's maybe what I mean when I say that she doesn't seem, the experience of the reader seems secondary. I think it's bigger than that, that it's simply that like, she doesn't mind that she's doing something that lacks category. And I think she's actually happiest to be between categories. And that's hard to find these days, because we create identities for ourselves partially by claiming categories, you know? And so I think to be beyond those is, it's inspiring, and I'm envious of her every day.
So you teach, or you've taught a class on her. I was doing a little research on you. I saw that you, teach a bunch of different classes. And one of the classes I saw you were offering was on this concept of ekphrasis.
Yes.
Which I don't know if I'm pronouncing correctly.
Yes.
But I was like, I'm not familiar with that word. And so I looked it up, and I found it really fascinating, and especially how it factors into your work. But if do you want to say a few words about this concept?
Yeah, I'm glad you bring it up, because so I did call the class The Art of Ekphrasis. Ekphrasis, either way. I think, and honestly, both could be wrong. But so many people didn't sign up because I think they were like, what is this? And so I did a re-rendition of it more recently, and I called it Writing with Art and Image. But for those interested, ekphrasis it's an ancient Greek term, and it is essentially, the origin was poems that were in conversation with a visual work of art. And it has expanded, I think, over time to be any piece of writing that is engaged with art in a way that extends beyond description. So it's not just like I'm relaying a painting in words. It's something about trying to capture the experience that happens between the viewer and the work. It could be a photograph, it could be a song. In that class, I talked about ekphrastic modes of writing and how a writer can drift into an ekphrastic mode, even if the whole piece isn't ekphrastic itself. And actually the next book I'm going to talk about, I think the writer does that very well. But it's something I'm interested in as well, because I think that the encounter between, I mean, of course, as we've been talking about this whole time, the encounter between the viewer and the work of art, and what you can glean about the artist through the work of art, and what you can glean about yourself by seeing the work of art. There's so much there. And in my own writing, I love thinking of how would my character respond to this painting or to this film. And I want to show them thinking through that thing so that the reader hopefully is getting insight to their way of processing the world in a way that isn't so overt. You know, because I think that dynamic is a mysterious one, but I also think it can be a telling one.
Yeah. Well, I think you use it to great effect in The Disappointment, because there's a lot of different examples of it in the book, but the narrator's husband is a photographer. He's a very renowned photographer. And so there's several different passages where the narrator is describing his husband's photographs and how he's feeling about them and like what they've meant, and other photographs that are in the same spaces. And I found those passages really affecting, and it is like such a great tool to get into someone's head. And it's also just something that like we experience so much of our lives is visual stimuli, you know? And so when I learned the term, I was like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense that he is, fascinated with this concept. And I'm curious, you said it's a part of this third and final book.
Yes.
What is this book?
So the final one, which is the most recently published, is Small Rain by Garth Greenwell.
Okay.
Do you know him at all?
I don't know.
Okay, he's great. He's when people come to the bookstore and they ask for contemporary queer writers, I run them to the G section. Okay. He's written 3 books, or 4 technically, but the first was a novella that then got kind of absorbed into the first novel.
Okay.
But he's written 3 books. All of them focus on the same character at different stages in his life. So the first 2, one is called What Belongs to You, and the second is called Cleanness. And those 2 are about an American who's teaching English in Bulgaria. And it's a lot about his relationships with men in the area, and complexity of like being an outsider in a community by virtue of being an American living abroad, but then an insider to a community within that community by being a queer person, and all of the levels of translatability and untranslatability that exists in all of those spaces. But Small Rain, which is his most recent one, is about that character because there's references to his time in Bulgaria.
Okay.
But at a very different time in his life where he's living in Iowa, and the book starts with him having a medical crisis, and he goes to the hospital, and the entire book is set with him in his hospital bed.
Really?
And when I read the premise, I thought, oh, this is such a good challenge for a writer, because
for real, yeah.
How do you make that interesting?
Yeah.
And I think he makes it like utterly compelling. And this is why I wanted to choose this book. So my takeaway from this book is it's one of those books you leave feeling like clear-sighted for a few days, a few weeks. He's such a sharp observer in a way that reminds me a little bit. Do you know Rachel Cusk at all?
I have not read any. I've been the Outline series,
yes,
right? Yeah, I've been wanting to read that for some time, and I haven't.
Yeah, they're very different writers, but they're both people who I think of when I think of like, oh, you like have X-ray vision on human life. Her vision is a little bit more cruel, I think, where his is a little more generous.
Okay.
Which is part of why this falls more in the category of a book anyone could read and enjoy.
Okay.
With her, I think you need a little bit more bite, maybe.
You need to be a little more misanthropic.
Yes.
Yeah.
But this book it moves between this character whose body is going through immense pain and he's confused. He doesn't know what's happening. The doctors don't know what's happening. And so in some ways it's like a medical crisis novel. And there's some definite energy that comes from that. And these encounters being passed around from nurses to doctors, everyone, poking and prodding, the feeling that you, a private individual, have just been made like a public entity by virtue of suddenly being in a hospital, and the oddness of that experience of feeling like, oh, in some ways I'm an object to you all. You do want to help me, but also I feel like I'm lacking in autonomy and dignity and all of those things. So there's that level of the kind of the body in crisis, but then there's the level of thinking, and this is where really he excels. He is just the character / Garth Greenwell, but he's just thinking through his life because he's stuck in a hospital bed, and so when you're not agonizing in pain, what are you doing? You're remembering things. Things are reminding you of other things. And to see him kind of be given the opportunity to slowly turn over various experiences in his life it feels like a very special, generous insight for the reader.
Yeah.
And I reference this section just to kind of make this point that there's this section where he, after having only been able to eat certain things for several days, he gets to eat a potato chip. And it's a silly moment in an otherwise not that silly book. But he writes for like 2 pages about the wonder of a potato chip. And he thinks through the whole process of like, how did this come to be in my hand?
Yeah.
And you kind of finish it and are like teary-eyed about a potato chip.
Yeah.
And I just think that's sort of the Garth Greenwell effect, is that he shows that if you pay close enough attention to anything, it can become really like resplendent, and it can become beautiful. It can become fascinating, especially those things that become so everyday to us that we barely even like register their existence, like a potato chip.
Right.
So it really like, it's one of those books that I think made me a more observant, more attentive and caring person. And it's just, and he also, and his prose style is very distinct. He started as a poet, which I think comes through when you read his work. But some people can get on board with his writing, others maybe less so. But I think that if you catch the rhythm of it, it's really hard to like want to put down.
That's so interesting too, that you said this is the 3rd book kind of in the series. Is he, while he's laying there in the bed, is he reflecting on events that happened in the other books?
Not really. So you definitely don't need to read them in order.
Okay.
And the first 2 are much more, I think, overtly connected.
Okay.
I think plenty of people have probably read this book without any knowledge of the prior 2 books. So don't feel like you need to read them in order. Yeah. But it's fun to get these little nods to his time in Bulgaria and to be like, oh, I remember at least the conditions of your life there.
Yeah.
You, the character, you know.
It's so fascinating when works of art do that, when they check in with a character over like long periods of time. Like I'm thinking of the Before films. I don't know if you've seen those, where it's like you're catching up with the same characters 9 years apart, 3 different times. And it's like, it's a subject that, the older I get, the more fascinated I am with it, because it's like, you both are a different person and aren't a different person, depending on different stages of your life.
Yes.
And it's so, for lack of a better word, cool to see like what changes and what remains the same, and it brings up questions of, the classic question, what is the self, and I'm curious if that's something that you would be interested in doing with the characters from The Disappointment. Selfishly, I'd love to see it.
Yeah. It's funny you bring that up, because I also love work that does that, whether in film or books, where you're seeing someone's life really over time, and you might skip a decade, but you're seeing the way that they change and don't change. But it's something I'm so terrified of as a writer, partially because, and I always, I've only written a few books, but I'm someone who is much more comfortable with a very constrained amount of time. So The Disappointment takes place over 3 days. And I knew from the jump, I was like, okay, I can handle a weekend, like I can do that. Where some writers are so good at having a grander sweep of time. Yeah. And I don't know, I'm interested in that. I once wrote a short story that was the same character as a different short story, but it was 10 years later. Okay. And I found the experience interesting, but not necessarily rewarding. Or not that it was unrewarding, but I don't think it didn't work for me in the way that I hoped, I think. But
what were you hoping for?
I think I was hoping to capture some of that, what you're talking about, of the simultaneous stability and instability of the self. And I think it's one of those odd paradoxes of living that we change so much, and we do, and also we don't, you know? And I, talk with my therapist all the time about like how odd it is that the way I can react to something today is maybe because of something that happened when I was 5.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing where I'm just like, really? Like,
Yeah.
haven't I lived enough life to replace that reaction with some other?
Right. Yeah. Shouldn't that file have gotten written over by now?
Totally. Yes. And turns out not the case.
Turns out those early years, they're written in Sharpie.
They stick with you. Yes. Yeah. And I don't know. I think that's cool. I was thinking when you were asking the question about, did you read Flesh? David?
No, that's that won the Booker Prize in
Yes.
2005, right? Yeah, I haven't read it yet.
That one I have mixed feelings about, but I think it's an interesting enough book to warrant reading.
Okay.
But it also it looks at a life kind of from above, where you're not dipping so much into the character's mind, but you're just watching him from the age of like 17, maybe 16 or 17, all the way through his life, and you miss huge chapters of time, and you get other chapters of time. But I think that if you're interested in work that is like toying with that feeling of like what becomes of a person, not in a microscopic sense, but in a macroscopic sense, that book I think does an interesting job of it.
I want to go back real quick to you're talking about how the disappointment takes place over a finite amount of time. Things, especially like a vacation, where you're taking a step, or you think you're taking a step away from your life. What you're really doing is getting reacquainted. Like you're losing all the things that kind of distract you from your life, and you're getting kind of reacquainted with just like who you actually are. And I felt that your book did a very profound job of doing that. I finished reading it while I was on a bachelor trip, and I found myself struck by that of just like, I'm like taking a break, quote unquote, from my life, but just finding like, oh, actually, I'm still here. I'm still like in almost like a heightened way, the things that like maybe I'm not thinking about as much in these quiet moments alone, walking on a beach, like it almost turns the volume up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I thought your book did a fantastic job of showing that.
Well, thank you for saying that. And I know exactly what you're talking about, where there's so much noise in our daily life that it feels like it's our most immediate experience of ourselves. But then, you're thrust out of it. You go on vacation, you go to the hospital, and suddenly you're like, oh, wait, I'm actually able to distract myself from myself just because of all the like daily elements that are happening around me at all times. And to be stripped away from those things, suddenly I'm like, oh God, I'm face to face with myself or with my relationship or, any of these things. Yeah. But I wanted to show the way that these characters, and Jack in particular, I think, because he's pulled away from their ordinary life, and he's kind of like, oh God, now I have to look at it all. Yeah. And look, he does. Yeah.
and wow, what a look.
And wow, what a look. Yes. A sad and horny look.
Ekphrastic.
Ekphrastic.
One could say.
Yes, one could say. And I wanted to mention, so with Small Rain, there's this like maybe 10 to 12 page passage that's just the character thinking through a poem. And again, it's one of those moments where you not only get the benefit of a really smart person talking through a poem for you in that way that like in a class, you're kind of like, oh, I definitely didn't read it that way, but I'm so glad you did. But you also learn a lot about the character. And so when I mentioned that there's this ekphrastic moment in this, and also in a lot of his other books, there's some ekphrastic moments. Those are kind of what I'm referring to, where you get to see a character really sit through a work of art, and he really slows down their processing of it. And he has them think one thing about it and then think, actually, no, that's not what I mean. What I might mean is maybe this thing. But you see the way that it takes a while for art to settle in the mind. Yeah. But watching it settle for someone and watching the kind of like redirects is its own, like, I don't know, it's such a wonder.
Man, it sounds amazing.
It's really
I
good.
really want to check out his writing. But right now we are at the time where it's time for you to check out the writing that I picked.
Yes.
In this wrapped
I'm excited.
up book. And so I was like, I have no idea what to get him because he's probably read everything. And then I was in Stories here in LA, shout out, and I saw this book, which I read years ago, and I was like, you know what? That's it.
Wow.
And let's see. I'm really curious if you've read this or not. So you can go ahead and
I can't wait.
rip into it.
Your anxiety, you're not alone. My family and friends are always just like, we're not buying you books. Like, you're so annoying to shop for.
Right. Yeah.
But let's see.
I'm
very excited. Oh my gosh, I haven't read it.
You haven't read it? Okay.
I haven't read it. Valley of the Dolls.
Valley of the Dolls by Jacqueline Suzanne. Are you familiar with it at all?
I'm only familiar in that I know that it has a cult following and that people love it and that it's been on my list, the ever-growing long list of just like, oh, I need to check that book out. But I have not read it. So please tell me about it.
That's great.
Yes.
Yeah. So I read this book several years ago and it is just like, it's just fun because it's just gossip. Like it's, part of why I chose it is it's an LA story. A lot of it's set here in LA. And so I think, anyone who's living here is going to enjoy it on that level. But I also just think that like there is so much in today's culture that like, whether directly or indirectly, like kind of stems from this of just like, cause it's a book about people trying to become famous and succeeding and failing that in various ways. And then all of the like, the baggage that comes with that, namely substance abuse. That's what the title's referring to. Valley of the Dolls. The dolls are the pills that these women are popping. And so I think it's incredibly relevant in that way to just see how some things change and some things don't. But it's also just like it's got like an element of camp to it. It's just kind of deliciously like salacious. Yeah. And it's kind of one of those books that is like not generally considered great literature. But who cares?
Yeah.
You know?
But it totally has a cult following. Yeah. And I mean, it sounds wonderful as someone, a fan of gossip myself. I say, if it's gossipy, sign me up. Yep. But thank you so much. I cannot wait to read it. Yeah.
And for those who are curious, what I didn't set this up well. What do you got to plug? You obviously have the book. Let's see.
Yes. So I have the book. Mm-hmm. The other thing is I teach these classes and they're unbiased, but they're very fun. I have recently started doing them in person in Highland Park, but I also do them online. And so if you are anyone listening or viewing who is interested in a writing class that is like intentionally non-pretentious or formal, it's very geared toward anyone, regardless of what experiences they've had before with reading and writing. I would say check out the classes. They're a great time. And I'm always coming up with new themes for them. So if you read the first one and think, maybe wait for the next one.
And where can people find you?
My website, just www.scottjbroker.com. And due to my technical deficiencies, you do have to type in www. or the website will not come up.
Wow. Okay.
But I think you can also probably Google me and the website should come up if Google is looking out for me.
Yeah. These days, who can tell?
Yeah.
Who can tell? But we'll have a link to that in the description.
Perfect. Thank you.
Scott, this was so fun. Thank you for coming.
So fun. Thank you so much.
Everyone listening and watching, thank you for listening and watching, and keep reading.